Chairman, and thank you again, Secretary Chao, for your long service to this country and for appearing before our committee today. According to the administration, and I think we've got our graphic up, but we may need better glasses to read that, but I direct people's attention to what is now up on the screens. According to the administration, a key element of this infrastructure proposal is to empower decision-making at the state and local level, because these are the officials who know best the infrastructure needs of their own communities. However, if we look at this chart, we'll see that 80% of the funding under this proposal goes to projects selected or approved by the administration, not by state and local government. Governors only get to allocate 20% of the funding, and the locals don't get to decide anything. Secretary Chao, can you explain how this squares with the vision of empowering state and local government when you look at, or if you can explain that dichotomy between
Well, we disagree with that chart, obviously. We feel that the local and state communities, and applicants will have a great deal of say. They will come up with the projects. They will decide who they want to work with. They'll decide what projects to prioritize. So it would be up to them. It would be a partnership.
But ultimately, the administration will be making the selection for those projects. Isn't that correct?
Well, the administration will be working on these projects as they do in the Tiger grants, as they do in the infra grants. It's the same concept.
I think most of us have found our experience with Tiger grants as governors are the ones who decide and prioritize those. So I think with all due respect,
well, that's an issue with the congressmen and the governors then.
Secretary Chao, the White House plan also provides limited federal dollars in order to incentivize non-federal partners. We've had some discussion about that. You personally have called this a, quote, new paradigm in infrastructure investment where the federal government takes a back seat. And frankly, I've got to tell you, I'm hearing this at the local level. I was just home in Connecticut. They see this as pushing the problem down onto the states and local government. Given that states and local governments already provide the majority of funding for highway and transit projects, why does the administration want to put more of the burden on local governments, many of which are already strained, and those that are struggling economically, that need this benefit most, are also going to be hit really hard by this shift?
Well, the national highway system, you know, our roads and bridges are actually very decentralized. 10% of the overall roads are owned by the federal government. They're called the interstate highway parts. The rest of the highway system, the national highway, is actually state and local. And then the rest of the roads and bridges are basically state and local. So the majority of the roads and bridges are actually locally owned. As mentioned, the federal government owns about 10% and we fund about 20%.
Although, again, I have 3 interstates, I'm just saying in my district, in my state, 91, 95, and 84, crossed by hundreds of thousands of Americans traveling up and down the eastern seaboard every single day. And those are aging infrastructure. Those of us in the chairman's district is like that too. We have aging interstate highway systems, and local and state authorities are not in a position to pay for the redo of all of that.
Well, this refers to, actually, I know that I know those routes very well, having spent my childhood in the New York area. So I think that what you're referring to is the whole issue of pay-fors. And I think the good news on the pay-fors is that everything is on the table, and we look forward to working with Congress on those.
Because I will tell you, again, this came up last week. I met with the state legislators, Republicans and Democrats, in my home state, and they're concerned. They're saying if the federal government is rolling back its commitment on infrastructure and the states are going to have to come up with that money, that's less money they have to pay for precisely the roads and bridges that you have identified that are already paid for by local government and states. So with all due respect, if there's less federal investment, because we're not talking about additional federal investment when there's a time of additional need, if there's less federal investment, states and localities will proportionally, especially when we have not erected and maintained, as the chairman pointed out, we haven't been maintaining the federal infrastructure or the state. And the federal government, with all due respect, I would suggest the federal government has a role in ensuring the federal investments are maintained.
Well, that is in your state, and we do not agree that it was a rollback. As I mentioned, most of the federal role is actually quite limited. And the beginning of our history, in our country's history, a lot of the infrastructure was done by the state and local and private sector. So there's been no rollback. The federal role was only confined to the interstate. There are many, many other roads and bridges and national highway systems that are not part of the federal role. But having said that, I acknowledge that pay for it is a big issue. And so we want to work with the Congress on finding solutions to that.
Thank you. We're over time.
Thank the gentlelady. Well,